Analysis of data, content analysis. Content analysis is a research tool used to determine the presence of certain words or concepts within texts or sets of text. Researchers quantify and analyze the presence, meanings, and relationships of such words and concepts, then make inferences about the messages within the texts, the writers, the audience, and even the culture and time of which these are a part. Texts can be defined broadly as books, book chapters, essays, interviews, discussions, newspaper headlines and articles, historical documents, speeches, conversations, advertising, theatre, informal conversation, or really any occurrence of communicative language. Texts in a single study may also represent a variety of different types of occurrences, such as Palmquist's 1990 study of two composition classes, in which he analyzed student and teacher interviews, writing journals, classroom discussions and lectures, and out-of-class interaction sheets. To conduct a content analysis on any such text, the text is coded or broken down into a manageable categories on a variety of levels: word, word sense, phrase, sentence, or theme, and then examined using one of content analysis basic methods: conceptual analysis or relational analysis. History of content analysis. Historically, content analysis was a time-consuming process. Analysis was done manually, or slow mainframe computers were used to analyze punch cards containing data punched in by human coders. Single studies could employ thousands of these cards. Human error and time constraints made this method impractical for large texts. However, despite its impracticality, content analysis was already an often utilized research method by the 1940s. Although initially limited to studies that examined texts for the frequency of the occurrence of identified terms, word counts, by the mid-1950s, researchers were already starting to consider the need for more sophisticated methods of analysis, focusing on concepts rather than simply words and on semantic relationships rather than just presence. De Sola Pool, 1959. While both traditions still continue today, content analysis now is also utilized to explore mental models and their linguistic, affective, cognitive, social, cultural, and historical significance. Uses of content analysis. Now, an attempt is made in this section using some studies as examples to explain about the applications of content analysis. Those scholars from various disciplines such as social sciences, communications, psychology, political science, history, and language studies use content analysis. It is most widely used in social science and mass communication research. It has been used broadly to understand a wide range of themes such as social change, cultural symbols, changing trends in the theoretical content of different disciplines, verification of authorship, changes in the mass media content, nature of news coverage of social issues or social problems such as atrocities against women, dowry harassment, social movements, ascertaining trends in propaganda, election issues as reflected in the mass media content, and so on. One of its most important applications has been to study social phenomena such as prejudice, discrimination, or changing cultural symbols in the communication content. For example, Belson and Salter, 1948, in their classic content analysis study highlighted the media under representation of minority groups. They studied prejudice, a consistent discrimination against minority groups of Americans in popular magazine fiction. The content analyzed 198 short stories published in 8 of the popular magazines during the period 1937 to 1943 and discussed their findings under the broad categories such as the distribution of characters, their role, appearance, status, and their goals, which the authors further classified as head goals and heart goals. Types of content analysis. In this guide, we discuss two general categories of content analysis: conceptual analysis, relational analysis. Conceptual analysis can be thought of as establishing the existence and frequency of concepts, most often represented by words or phrases in a text. For instance, say you have a hunch that your favorite poet often writes about hunger. With conceptual analysis, you can determine how many times words such as hunger, hungry, famished, or starving appear in a volume of poems. In contrast, relational analysis goes one step further by examining the relationships among concepts in a text. Returning to the hunger example, with relational analysis, you could identify what other words or phrases, hunger or famished, appear next to, and then determine what different meanings emerge as a result of these groupings. Conceptual analysis. Conceptual analysis begins with identifying research questions and choosing a sample or samples. Once chosen, the text must be coded into manageable content categories. The process of coding is basically one of selective reduction. By reducing the text to categories consisting of a word, set of words or phrases, the researcher can focus on and code for specific words or patterns that are indicative of the research question. An example of a conceptual analysis would be to examine several Clinton speeches on healthcare made during the 1992 presidential campaign and code them for the existence of certain words. In looking at these speeches, the research question might involve examining the number of positive words used to describe Clinton's proposed plan and the number of negative words used to describe the current status of healthcare in America. The researcher would be interested only in quantifying these words, not in examining how they are related, which is a function of relational analysis. In conceptual analysis, the researcher simply wants to examine presence with respect to his or her research question. That is there a stronger presence of positive or negative words used with respect to proposed or current healthcare plans respectively? Relational analysis. As with other sorts of inquiry, initial choices with regard to what is being studied and or coded for often determine the possibilities of that particular study. For relational analysis, it is important to first decide which concept type will be explored in the analysis. Studies have been conducted with as few as 1 and as many as 500 concept categories. Obviously, too many categories may obscure your results and too few can lead to unreliable and potentially invalid conclusions. Therefore, it is important to allow the context and necessities of your research to guide your coding procedures. The steps to relational analysis that we consider in this guide suggest some of the possible avenues available to a researcher doing content analysis. We provide an example to make the process easier to grasp. However, the choices made within the context of the example are but only a few of many possibilities. The diversity of techniques available suggests that there is quite a bit of enthusiasm for this mode of research. Once a procedure is rigorously tested, it can be applied and compared across populations over time. The process of relational analysis has achieved a high degree of computer automation, but still is, like most forms of research, time-consuming. Perhaps the strongest claim that can be made is that it maintains a high degree of statistical rigor without losing the richness of detail apparent in even more qualitative methods. Approaches to content analysis. The kind of analysis that researchers employ will vary significantly according to their theoretical approach. Key theoretical approaches that inform content analysis include linguistics and cognitive science. Linguistic approaches to content analysis focus analysis of texts on the level of a linguistic unit, typically single clause units. One example of this type of research is Gottschalk, 1975, who developed an automated procedure which analyzes each clause in a text and assigns it a numerical score based on several emotional or psychological scales. Another technique is to code a text grammatically into clauses and parts of speech to establish a matrix representation, Carle, 1990. Approaches that derive from cognitive science include the creation of decision maps and mental models. Decision maps attempt to represent the relationship between ideas, beliefs, attitudes, and information available to an author when making a decision within a text. These relationships can be represented as logical, inferential, causal, sequential, and mathematical relationships. Typically, two of these links are compared in a single study and are analyzed as networks. For example, Hayes, 1987, used logical and sequential links to examine symbolic interaction. This methodology is thought of as a more generalized cognitive mapping technique rather than the more specific mental models approach. Mental models are groups or networks of interrelated concepts that are thought to reflect conscious or subconscious perceptions of reality. According to cognitive scientists, internal mental structures are created as people draw inferences and gather information about the world. Mental models are a more specific approach to mapping because, beyond extraction and comparison, because they can be numerically and graphically analyzed. Such models rely heavily on the use of computers to help analyze and construct mapping representations. Typically, studies based on this approach follow 5 general steps: identifying concepts, defining relationship types, coding the text on the basis of 1 and 2, coding the statements, graphically displaying and numerically analyzing the resulting maps. To create the model, a researcher converts a text into a map of concepts and relations. The map is then analyzed on the level of concepts and statements, where a statement consists of 2 concepts and their relationship. Carle, 1990, asserts that this makes possible the comparison of a wide variety of maps, representing multiple sources, implicit and explicit information, as well as socially shared cognitions. Content analysis, issues of reliability and validity. The issues of reliability and validity are concurrent with those addressed in other research methods. The reliability of a content analysis study refers to its stability, or the tendency for coders to consistently recode the same data in the same way or over a period of time. Reproducibility, or the tendency for a group of coders to classify categories membership in the same way, and accuracy, or the extent to which the classification of a text corresponds to a standard or norm statistically. Gottschalk, 1995, points out that the issue of reliability may be further complicated by the inescapably human nature of researchers. For this reason, he suggests that coding errors can only be minimized and not eliminated. He shoots for 80% as an acceptable margin for reliability. On the other hand, the validity of a content analysis study refers to the correspondence of the categories to the conclusions and the generalizability of the results to a theory. The validity of categories in implicit concept analysis, in particular, is achieved by utilizing multiple classifiers to arrive at an agreed upon definition of category. For example, a content analysis study might measure the occurrence of the concept category communist is presidential inaugural speeches. Using multiple classifiers, the concept category can be broadened to include synonyms such as red, Soviet threat, pinkos, godless infidels, and Marxist sympathizers. Communist is held to be the explicit variable, while red, etc. are the implicit variables. The overarching problem of concept analysis research is the challengeable nature of conclusions reached by its inferential procedures. The question lies in what level of implication is allowable. That is, do the conclusions follow from the data, or are they explainable due to some other phenomenon? For occurrence specific studies, for example, can the second occurrence of a word carry equal weight as the 99th? Reasonable conclusions can be drawn from the substantive amounts of quantitative data, but the question of proof may still remain unanswered. This problem is again best illustrated when one uses computer programs to conduct word counts. The problem of distinguishing between synonyms and homonyms can completely throw off one's results, invalidating any conclusions one infers from the results. The word mine, for example, variously denotes a personal pronoun, an explosive device, and a deep hole in the ground from which ore is extracted. One may obtain an accurate count of that word's occurrence and frequency, but not have an accurate accounting of the meaning inherent in each particular usage. For example, one may find 50 occurrences of the word mine, but if one is only looking specifically for mine as an explosive device and 17 of the occurrences are actually personal pronouns, the resulting 50 is an inaccurate result. Any conclusions drawn as a result of that number would render that conclusion invalid. The generalizability of one's conclusions then is very dependent on how one determines concept categories, as well as on how reliable those categories are. It is imperative that one defines categories that accurately measure the idea and/or items one is seeking to measure. Akin to this is the construction of rules. Developing rules that allow one and others to categorize and code the same data in the same way over a period of time, referred to as stability, is essential to the success of a conceptual analysis. Reproducibility not only of specific categories but of general methods applied to establishing all sets of categories makes a study and its subsequent conclusions and results more sound. A study which does this, that is, in which the classification of a text corresponds to a standard or norm, is said to have accuracy. Advantages and disadvantages of content analysis. Advantages. Content analysis offers several advantages to researchers who consider using it. In particular, content analysis looks directly at communication via texts and transcripts, and hence gets at the central aspect of social interaction, can allow for both quantitative and qualitative operations, can provide valuable historical, cultural insights over time through analysis of texts, allows a closeness to text which can alternate between specific categories and relationships, and also statistically analyzes the coded form of the text, can be used to interpret texts for purposes such as the development of expert system, since knowledge and rules can both be coded in terms of explicit statements about the relationships among concepts, is an unobtrusive means of analyzing interactions, provides insight into complex models of human thought and language use. Disadvantages. Content analysis suffers from several disadvantages, both theoretical and procedural. In particular, content analysis can be extremely time-consuming, is subject to increased error, particularly when relational analysis is used to attain a higher level of interpretation, is often devoid of theoretical base or attempts to liberally to draw meaningful inferences about the relationships and impacts implied in a study, is inherently reductive, particularly when dealing with complex texts tends too often to simply consist of word counts, often disregards the context that produced the text as well as the state of things after the text is produced, can be difficult to automate or computerize. What content analysis can do? It goes beyond the impressionistic observations about the phenomena and can help you make a quantitative expression about the phenomenon. That is, express it in numbers, in percentages, which will be more specific and objective. It is an unobtrusive research technique useful to study sensitive research topics. It is context sensitive and therefore can process symbolic meanings of data. Though predominantly seen as quantitative method, it can effectively capture qualitative content as well. The context sensitivity of the method will be useful in articulating the qualitative dimensions, such as, for example, the direction of coverage of news items as favorable or unfavorable. It is a safe method in the sense that if the researcher found that a portion of the necessary information was missing or incorrectly coded, it is possible to return to the text and supplement the missing data. This is not always possible in experimental or survey research. It can deal with large volumes of data. Processing may be laborious, but of late computers made the job fairly easy. It is a shoestring methodology which is typically labor intensive and requires minimum capital investment. What it cannot do? Its inferences are limited to the content of the text only. Similarly, symbols are processed and coded according to the attribution given by the researcher or coder. There is no guarantee that the sender or receiver shares the same attributed meaning. When it deals with semantic differences or differences in regard to the meanings of words, the findings can be less valid and reliable. It is argued that content analysis, which confines itself to counting the individual units and their frequency of occurrence, such as, for example, the number of times the word globalization appeared, may fail to capture the meaning or significance with which these symbols are used in the texts analyzed. The reliability and validity issues in content analysis still remain unresolved. The method cannot be used to test causal relationships between variables. Doing content analysis. Content analysis begins with a specific statement of the objectives or research questions to be studied. The researcher asks the question, "What do I want to find out from this communication content?" and frames the objectives for study. The researcher must therefore locate a source of communication relevant to the research question and ask questions that can be solved by content analysis. The objective of content analysis is to convert recorded raw phenomena into data, which can be treated in essentially a scientific manner so that a body of knowledge may be built up. In fact, the researcher who wishes to undertake a study using content analysis must deal with 4 methodological issues: selection of units of analysis, developing categories, sampling appropriate content, and checking reliability of coding. More specifically, studies using content analysis usually involve the following 6 steps: formulation of the research question or objectives, selection of communication content and sample, developing content categories, finalizing units of analysis, preparing a coding schedule. To sum up, content analysis is a useful research technique for analyzing large bodies of text. It offers objective guidelines in the coding of the text and to draw inferences from the data. It helps in the coding of the text according to systematic and objective rules and in drawing inferences from the data. A successful content analysis study is the outcome of a series of good decisions. The process starts from the point of deciding whether the method is suitable to study the research topic under question. After clearly setting out the objectives of the study, the researcher proceeds to make decisions relating to units of analysis, developing content categories, sample and the sampling period, Orienting coders, checking intercoder reliabilities, and selecting appropriate statistical designs for presenting results are some of the essential tasks which add rigor to the study.